Good day everyone. This is Ivan Kent C. Barger, and today I will be discussing about Asian regionalism as well as its connection to globalization. So let's proceed. Our objectives. At the end of the 60-minute discussion, the students should be able to first differentiate between regionalization and globalization. Next one would be identify the factors leading to a greater integration of the Asian region. And lastly, analyze how different Asian states confront the challenges of globalization and regionalization. Next slide. What are regions? Regions are a group of countries located in the same geographically specified areas. The next one will be regions can be a combination of two regions. Regions can be a combination of more than two regions organized to regulate and oversee flows and policy choices. Our next one. What is regionalization? The process of dividing an area into smaller segments called regions. Division of nation into states or provinces. And lastly, in the economic context, regionalization is a management tool.
Hi, and welcome to our first lesson for our regionalization unit. Today, your bell work asks you to define regions. It's an area or division, especially a part of a country or the world, having definable characteristics but not always fixed boundaries. In addition to writing this definition in your bell work, I want you to also try to give me an example. It's okay to guess, but what do you think is an example of a region? For our objective today, or what are we doing today, we are going to discover what regions can look like so that we can identify how varied they are depending on who is acknowledging them. Go ahead and pause the video in order to jot this down on your bell worksheet. Intro to regionalization. On the next slides, you will see 3 images. Like we've been doing in class, we are going to record our initial thoughts on each. So as you're taking notes on your own, there is no worksheet today. What do we see, think, and wonder for each of these 3 images? In addition to those initial thoughts today, I want you to jot down a couple terms, like words, or regions that are familiar to you, and a couple that seem unfamiliar that maybe you haven't heard of before. The first source, or source 1, is world regions as defined by the World Bank. Take a moment, pause the video, and jot down your initial thoughts, so what we see, think, and wonder. And then also make sure to remember that there is a second part. So what's some areas or regions that are familiar to you, and what areas seem unfamiliar to you? Go ahead and pause the video. For source 2, we're looking at world regions as defined by the World Health Organization. So this is a different organization. Like you did for source 1, just jot down some initial observations, things you see, think, or wonder. Also jot down some areas that are familiar and some areas that are unfamiliar. Go ahead and pause the video until you're ready to keep going. For source 3, we're looking at the world regions as defined by the Pre-AP World History and Geography course. So this is from College Board. So for this third source, again, something you see, think, or wonder, and then some areas that are familiar and some areas that are unfamiliar. Go ahead and pause to do that. Now in your notes, you're going to answer some questions. For the first question, it says, what are some similarities among these maps? So some of the areas you were familiar with might have similarities, right? You can go back, like pause the video and rewind a little bit if you need to, but try to think of some similarities you think you noticed among these 3 maps. For question 2, it says, how do these maps demonstrate different choices about which information to include or exclude? So they have made different choices, these map makers have made different choices about what information to put on their maps. How do these maps demonstrate that? For the third question, you might want to wait a moment because it says, how might the creators of these maps have different criteria for defining these regions? So the creators are going to be the World Bank, the World Health Organization, and then our course, right? So these creators have different criteria. How might they be different? You wouldn't really know that unless you know what the World Bank is, what the World Health Organization is, right? And then we have an idea of what our course is. So in order to answer number 3, you can wait until we go to the next slide, but pause the video and do 1 and 2 now. For question 3, it asks you to compare how the creators might have varied in what information they put on these maps. And it's because they're different organizations. So take a moment and just read through these organizations, pause the video, or you can listen and I'll just read them to you. You can pause and read on your own and then just wait or fast forward the video to the next slide if you want. So the World Bank is a vital source of financial and technical assistance to developing countries around the world. They're not a bank in the ordinary sense, but a unique partnership to reduce poverty and support development. They provide low-interest loans and grants, among other things, to developing countries. These support a wide array of investments in areas such as education, health, infrastructure like bridges and roads, agriculture, and environmental and natural resource management. So how can they best use their natural resources? The World Health Organization is something you might have heard of a lot recently, and that's because they've had a lot of say in COVID. So the World Health Assembly is attended by delegations from all member states, meaning if you belong to the World Health Organization, you have someone there, a member there present. Their main areas of work are health systems, non-communicable and communicable diseases, preparedness, so like were we prepared for COVID? Surveillance and response to things like COVID, and corporate services. Their core function is to direct and coordinate international health work through collaboration. So how can we work together? That's why it's called the World Health Organization. And lastly, and most familiar, is the pre-AP World History and Geography course. The College Board, that's the organization that put your course together, is a mission-driven, not-for-profit organization that connects students like you to college success and opportunity. The College Board helps students prepare for a successful transition to college through programs and services in college readiness and college success. So this includes things like the SAT and the Advanced Placement Program. So because these organizations are so different, they are going to have different boundaries. They're going to have different criteria for how they identify their regional boundaries. So take a moment, answer number 3 on your sheet. On the next slide, we're going to locate the countries of Somalia and Algeria on each of the 3 maps. What do the regions in which these countries are placed tell us about regional boundaries across multiple organizations? So let's look. The pink notes Algeria, right? So in the upper left-hand corner, we're looking at the World Bank's map. And the green notes Somalia. If you look, Algeria is in the Middle East and North Africa region, and Somalia is in the Sub-Saharan African region. If we look at the map on the upper right-hand side, that's the World Health Organization's map, and Algeria is located in what they call Africa, and then Somalia, while on the continent of Africa, is actually going to be in the Eastern Mediterranean region. Lastly, in the black and white version, or on the bottom, that's the AP course map. They have Algeria in North Africa, and then they have Somalia in East Africa. So why would they have these countries in different regions? What do you think about that? All right, did you know that the United States has regional boundaries as well? Can you, on your own, determine some of the names of the regional boundaries? What region do you think we are in? Jot that down, and then let's look. According to the National Geographic Regional Boundary Map, we are in the southeast, since we're in Central Florida, right? We're in the southeast region. But according to the Federal Reserve map, we're actually in what's called District 6. The Federal Reserve is like a central bank that kind of backs up all of our other banks, right? And so they have different districts that have different monetary like leaders, and you'll learn more about it as a senior, but we're in what's called District 6. When you look at the Census Bureau, which is a government bureau, right, that kind of just collects data on all kinds of things. Sometimes you might notice that your parents, or you can ask them if they fill out their census every year, but we are in what's called the Atlanta zone, so which is kind of weird because we're in Florida. And the last one we're going to look at is Standard Time Zone, which I'm sure you've heard of. So we are in the Eastern Standard Time Zone. So even the United States, and there are more than this, and there are more government-recognized regional boundaries, and they all vary depending on which government body we're talking about. So we have all kinds all over the United States. Lastly, you're going to get on Canvas, and in your Intro to Regionalization Lessons and Instructions, which is the first thing in our new module, it's going to have a Word document and probably a PDF of an article that has 3 questions. Those 3 questions are what you are going to be submitting on Canvas in order to get your grade for today's work, okay? So make sure you get it uploaded into Canvas on time and completely done. Thank you.
Next one. So what is regionalism? Regionalism is created as a sort of counter-globalization. Regionalization organizers will always prefer regional partners over the rest of the world. So next one would be what is globalization? So the expansion of intensification of social relations and consciousness across world space and world time.
Globalization is a widely discussed topic. It is therefore not all that easy to explain such a complicated term in simple words. Let's start from the beginning with the background to globalization. Advances in technology, such as mobile phones, aeroplanes, telephones, and the Internet, have made the growth of transport and communication networks possible. Amongst other things, this means that people and countries can exchange information and goods more quickly and in a less complicated way. This process is called globalization. Globalization comes from globe and means the worldwide coming together of countries and nations. Let's look at an example. Companies used to manufacture products in their home countries, just like the companies Profi TV and Supercolor, who produce televisions in country A. Their products are in direct competition with each other, but both companies pay the same salaries and production costs. They have the same customers, use similar suppliers, and sell televisions at similar prices. In short, the same conditions apply to both companies. So far, so good. Due to technical, cultural, and economic developments that have come about through globalization, other companies which manufacture products under different conditions can now offer their products in country A too. That's why a company from country B can sell televisions here at a lower price because they were produced for less. The local firms Supercolor and Profi TV have to react to withstand the competition. And so the world grows closer together, and there is an active exchange of goods between countries. More affordable products are available for more people. However, not only does an exchange of products and economic goods take place, but also of services, knowledge, cultural goods, and even languages. All of these individual elements are closely linked and influence each other. But where there is light, there is also shadow. Because of globalization and this intense exchange of goods, people and the environment often suffer. If a company decides to move production to an economically disadvantaged country, people in industrialized countries lose their jobs. At the same time, job opportunities open up to many locals in the economically disadvantaged country. Many people in these countries work for very little money in comparison to those in industrialized countries. Therefore, they often remain poor and more often than not do not have sufficient insurance, social insurance, or health insurance cover. A further disadvantage of globalization is ecological problems such as climate change. The use of aeroplanes, ships, and lorries to transport goods over international borders is constantly on the increase. This causes more carbon dioxide to be released into the atmosphere, which, in turn, is the main cause of global warming. Even national environmental standards are ignored. This is a further cost factor in the worldwide international site competition, which should be kept as low as possible to be attractive for a company. There are therefore many sides to globalization which affect almost all aspects of life, causing me to think that the chain of positive and negative effects will continue to grow further. What's important is to realize that globalization itself is neither good nor bad. It just depends how people deal with all the new possibilities in the future.
Okay, so the differences between globalization and regionalization. Okay, so what we have here is a table. So in terms of nature, in globalization, globalization promotes integration of economic across state borders all around the world, while regionalization divides an area into smaller segments. While the next one would be in terms of market. So in globalization, allows many corporations to trade on international level. It allows free market. For regionalization, monopolies are more likely to develop. Monopoly means one producer controls supply of a good or service, and where the entry of new producers is prevented or highly restricted. So, in terms of cultural and social relations, in globalization, the acceleration to multiculturalism through free and inexpensive movement of people. For regionalization, it does not support multiculturalism. So, in terms of aid, so for globalization, globalized international communities are more willing to aid countries stricken by disasters. For regionalization, a regionalized area does not get involved in the affairs of the other areas. So, and lastly, in terms of technological advances, for globalization, globalization has driven great advances in technology. For regionalization, advanced technology is rarely available in other country or in one country or region. So, regional integration. So, regional integration is the process by which two or more nation states agree to cooperate and work closely together to achieve peace, stability, and wealth. So, the entire world is moving towards integration. So, it is inevitable. In Asia, the Southeast Asian countries have already formed ASEAN, or the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. So this regional power bloc appears to work fine. So the member states fit very well together because of the following factors.
Regional integration is a process in which neighboring states enter into an agreement in order to upgrade cooperation through common institutions and rules. The objectives of the agreement could range from economic to political to environmental, although it has typically taken the form of a political economy initiative where commercial interests are the focus for achieving broader socio-political and security objectives, as defined by national governments. Regional integration has been organized either via supranational institutional structures or through intergovernmental decision-making, or a combination of both. Past efforts at regional integration have often focused on removing barriers to free trade in the region, increasing the free movement of people, labor, goods, and capital across national borders, reducing the possibility of regional regional armed conflict, and adopting cohesive regional stances on policy issues such as the environment, climate change and migration. Intra-regional trade refers to trade which focuses on economic exchange primarily between countries of the same region or economic zone. In recent years, countries within economic trade regimes such as ASEAN in Southeast Asia, for example, have increased the level of trade and commodity exchange between themselves, which reduces the inflation and tariff barriers associated with foreign markets, resulting in growing prosperity. Overview. Regional integration has been defined as the process through which national states voluntarily mingle, merge and mix with the neighbors so as to lose the factual attributes of sovereignty while acquiring new techniques for resolving conflicts among themselves. Lombard and Van Langenhove describe it as a worldwide phenomenon of territorial systems that increases the interactions between their components and creates new forms of organization, coexisting with traditional forms of state-led organization at the national level. Some scholars see regional integration simply as the process by which states within a particular region increase the level of interaction with regard to economic, security, political or social and cultural issues. In short, regional integration is the joining of individual states within a region into a larger whole. The degree of integration depends upon the willingness and commitment of independent sovereign states to share the sovereignty. Deep integration that focuses on regulating the business environment in a more general sense is faced with many difficulties. Regional integration initiatives, according to Van Langenhove, should fulfill at least 8 important functions: the strengthening of trade integration in the region, the creation of an appropriate enabling environment for private sector development, the development of infrastructure programs in support of economic growth and regional integration, the development of strong public sector institutions and good governance, the reduction of social exclusion and the development of an inclusive civil society. Contribution to peace and security in the region, the building of environment programs at the regional level, the strengthening of the region's interaction with other regions of the world. The crisis of the post-war order led to the emergence of a new global political structure. This new global political structure made obsolete the classical Westphalian concept of a system of sovereign states to conceptualize world politics. The concept of sovereignty became looser, and the old legal definitions of the ultimate and fully autonomous power of a nation-state are no longer meaningful. Sovereignty, which gained meaning as an affirmation of cultural identity, has lost meaning as power over the economy. All regional integration projects during the Cold War were built on the Westphalian state system and were designed to serve economic growth as well as security motives in their assistance to state-building goals. Regional integration and globalization are two phenomena that have challenged the pre-existing global order based upon sovereign states since the beginning of the 21st century. The two processes deeply affect the stability of the Westphalian state system, thus contributing to both disorder and a new global order. Closer integration of neighboring economies has often been seen by governments as a first step in creating a larger regional market for trade and investment. This is claimed to spur greater efficiency, productivity gain and competitiveness, not just by lowering border barriers, but by reducing other costs and risks of trade and investment. Bilateral and sub-regional trading arrangements have been advocated by governments as economic development tools, as they've been designed to promote economic deregulation. Such agreements have also aimed to reduce the risk of reversion towards protectionism, locking in reforms already made and encouraging further structural adjustment. Some claim the desire for closer integration is usually related to a larger desire for opening nation-states to the outside world, or that regional economic cooperation is pursued as a means of promoting development through greater efficiency, rather than as a means of disadvantaging others. It is also claimed that the members of these arrangements hope that they will succeed as building blocks for progress with a growing range of partners and towards a generally freer and open global environment for trade and investment, and that integration is not an end in itself, but a process to support economic growth strategies, greater social equality and democratization. However, regional integration strategies as pursued by economic and national interests, particularly in the last 30 years, have also been highly contested across civil society. There is no conclusive evidence to suggest that the strategies of economic deregulation or increased investor protection implemented as forms of regional integration have succeeded in contributing to progress in sustainable economic growth, as the number of economic crises around the world have increased in frequency and intensity over the past decades. Also, there is increasing evidence that the forms of regional integration employed by nation-states have actually worsened social inequality and diminished democratic accountability. As a result of the persisting contradiction between the old promises of regional integration and real-world experience, the demand from across global civil society for alternative forms of regional integration has grown. Regional integration arrangements are a part and parcel of the present global economic order, and this trend is now an acknowledged feature of the international scene. It has achieved a new meaning and new significance. Regional integration arrangements are mainly the outcome of necessity felt by nation-states to integrate their economies in order to achieve rapid economic development, decrease conflict, and build mutual trusts between the integrated units. The nation-state system, which has been the predominant pattern of international relations since the Peace of Westphalia in 1648, is evolving towards a system in which regional groupings of states is becoming increasingly important vis-à-vis sovereign states. Some have argued that the idea of the state and its sovereignty has been made irrelevant by processes that are taking place at both the global and local level. Walter Lippmann believes that the true constituent members of the international order of the future are communities of states. E. H. Carr shares Lippmann's view about the rise of regionalism and regional arrangements and commented that the concept of sovereignty is likely to become in the future even more blurred and indistinct than it is at present. Regional integration agreements. Regional integration agreements have led to major developments in international relations between and among many countries, specifically increases in international trade and investment and in the formation of regional trading blocs, as fundamental to the multifaceted process of globalization. Regional integration has been a major development in the international relations of recent years. As such, regional integration agreements has gained higher importance. Not only are almost all the industrial nations part of such agreements, but also a huge number of developing nations too are a part of at least one, and in cases, more than one such agreement. The amount of trade that takes place within the scope of such agreements is about 35%, which accounts for more than one-third of the trade in the world. The main objective of these agreements is to reduce trade barriers among those nations concerned, but the structure may vary from one agreement to another. The removal of the trade barriers, a liberalization of many economies, it has had multiple impacts, in some cases increasing gross domestic product, but also resulting in greater global inequality, concentration of wealth, and an increasing frequency and intensity of economic crises. The number of agreements agreed under the rules of the GATT and the WTO and signed in each year has dramatically increased since the 1990s. There were 194 agreements ratified in 1999, and it contained 94 agreements formed the early 1990s. The last few years have experienced huge qualitative as well as quantitative changes in the agreements related to the regional integration scheme. The top three major changes were deep integration recognition, closed regionalism to open model, advent of trade blocs. Deep integration recognition. Deep integration recognition analyzes the aspect that effective integration is a much broader aspect, surpassing the idea that reducing tariffs, quotas and barriers will provide effective solutions. Rather, it recognizes the concept that additional barriers tend to segment the markets. This in turn impedes the free flow of goods and services, along with ideas and investments. Hence, it is now recognized that the current framework of traditional trade policies are not adequate enough to tackle these barriers. Such deep integration was first implemented in the Single Market Programme in the European Union. However, in the light of the modern context, this debate is being propounded into the clauses of different regional integration agreements arising out of increase in international trade. Closed regionalism to open model. The change from a system of closed regionalism to a more open model had arisen out of the fact that the section of trading blocs that were created among the developing countries during the 1960s and 1970s were based on certain specific models such as those of import substitution as well as regional agreements coupled with the prevalence generally higher external trade barriers. The positive aspects of such shifting is that there has been some restructuring of certain old agreements. These agreements tend to be more forward in their outward approach as well as show commitment in trying to advance international trade and commerce, instead of trying to put a cap on it by way of strict control. Advent of trade blocs. The advent of trade blocs tend to draw in some parity between high-income industrial countries and developing countries with a much lower income base in that they tend to serve as equal partners under such a system. The concept of equal partners grew out of the concept of providing reinforcement to the economies to all the member countries. Under these sections, the various countries agree upon the fact that they will help economies to maintain the balance of trade between and prohibit the entry of other countries in the trade process. An important example of this would be the North American Free Trade Area, formed in 1994 when the Canada-US Free Trade Agreement was extended to Mexico. Another vibrant example would entail as to how EU has formed linkages incorporating the transition economies of Eastern Europe through the Europe agreements. It has signed agreements with the majority of Mediterranean countries by highly developing the EU-Turkey customs union and a Mediterranean policy. Recent regional integration. Regional integration in Europe was consolidated in the Treaty on the European Union, which came into force in November 1993 and established the European Union. The European Free Trade Association is a free trade bloc of 4 countries which operates in parallel and linked into the European Union. In January 1994, the North American Free Trade Agreement was formed when Mexico acceded to a prior existing bilateral free trade agreement between the US and Canada. In the Pacific there was the ASEAN Free Trade Area in 1993 which looked into reducing the tariffs. The AFTA started in full swing in 2000. Alternative regional integration. In the last decade, regional integration has accelerated and deepened around the world, in Latin America and North America, Europe, Africa, and Asia, with the formation of new alliances and trading blocs. However, critics of the forms this integration have consistently pointed out that the forms of regional integration promoted have often been neoliberal in character, in line with the motives and values of the World Trade Organization, the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, promoting financial deregulation, the removal of barriers to capital and global corporations, their owners and investors, focusing on industrialization, boosting global trade volumes and increasing GDP. This has been accompanied by a stark increase in global inequality, growing environmental problems as a result of industrial development, the displacement of formerly rural communities, ever-expanding urban slums, rising unemployment and the dismantling of social and environmental protections. Global financial deregulation has also contributed to the increasing frequency and severity of economic crises, while governments have increasingly lost the sovereignty to take action to protect and foster weakened economies, as they are held to the rules of free trade implemented by the WTO and IMF. Advocates of alternative regional integration argue strongly that the solutions to global crises must involve regional solutions and regional integration, since they transcend national borders and territories and require the cooperation of different peoples across geography. However, they propose alternatives to the dominant forms of neoliberal integration, which attends primarily to the needs of transnational corporations and investors. Renowned economist, Harvard professor, former senior vice president and chief economist of the World Bank, Joseph Stiglitz has also argued strongly against neoliberal globalization. Stiglitz argues that the deregulation, free trade, and social spending cuts or austerity policies of neoliberal economics have actually created and worsened global crises. In his 2002 book Globalization and Its Discontents, he explains how the industrialized economies of the US, Europe, Japan, South Korea and Taiwan developed not with the neoliberal policies promoted in developing countries and the Global South by the WTO, IMF and World Bank, but rather with a careful mix of protection, regulation, social support and intervention from national governments in the market. The People's Agenda for Alternative Regionalisms. The People's Agenda for Alternative Regionalisms is a network of civil society, social movement and community-based organizations from around the world, calling for alternative forms of regional integration. PAS strives to promote cross-fertilization of experiences on regional alternatives among social movements and civil society organizations from Asia, Africa, South America and Europe. Further, T aims to contribute to the understanding of alternative regional integration as a key strategy to struggle against neoliberal globalization and to broaden the base among key social actors for political debate and action around regional integration, and is thus committed to expanding and deepening global democracy. PAR aims to build trans-regional processes to develop the concept of people's integration, articulate the development of new analyses and insights on key regional issues, expose the problems of neoliberal regional integration and the limits of the export-led integration model, share and develop joint tactics and strategies for critical engagement with regional integration processes as well as the development of people's alternatives. It draws on and extends the work of such Southern African People's Solidarity Network SAPSN. The PAR initiative aims to develop these networks and support their efforts to reclaim democracy in the regions, recreate processes of regional integration and advance people-centered regional alternatives. In the video Global Crises, Regional Solutions, the network argues that regional integration and cooperation is essential for tackling the many dimensions of the current global crisis and that no country can face these crises alone. The video also calls for countries to break the dependency on the global markets, as well as the dominant development model that has failed to address increasing global hunger, poverty, and environmental destruction, resulting instead in greater inequality and social unrest. Regional integration, the video argues, should be much more than macroeconomic cooperation between states and corporations. It should protect shared ecological resources and should promote human development, health, well-being and democracy as the base of economic development. Bibliography: Bosl, Anton, Breitenbach, Willy, Hartzenberg, Trudy, McCarthy, Colin, Shade, Klaus. Monitoring Regional Integration in Southern Africa. Yearbook Volume 8, Stellenbosch 2009. ISBN 97809814221-1. Clark, Simona Noelka Andreas, Deep Integration, in D+C 2010, 03, 114-117. Duina, Francesco, The Social Construction of Free Trade, the EU, NAFTA and Mercosur, Princeton University Press. Haas, Ernst B. Beyond the Nation-State, Functionalism and International Organization, Stanford University Press. ISBN 978-0804701877. Lindberg, Leon N., and Stuart A. Scheingeld. Regional Integration, Theory and Research, Cambridge, Harvard University Press. ISBN 978-0674-75326-6. Michael Arndt, India's Foreign Policy and Regional Multilateralism. Basingstoke, Palgrave Macmillan. ISBN 9781137263117. Nye, Josephus. Peace in Parts. Boston, Little, Brown.
So these are the following factors. Why do countries form regional association? So first, in terms of military defense. So the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or the NATO, was formed to protect Europe from the threat of the Soviet Union. And as a response, the Soviet Union created the Warsaw Pact. And the next one will be the economic crisis. So the ASEAN countries, along with the China, Japan, South Korea, established an emergency fund that stabilized Asian economies after the rippling effect of the Thai economic collapse. The next one would be in terms of resources. So countries need to pool their resources together to make themselves more powerful. The Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, or the OPEC, rose in power when they took over domestic production and controlled crude oil prices across the globe. And the next one would be the protection of independence. The countries under the Non-Alignment Movement, or the NAM, refused to side with the capitalists, Western Europe and North America, or the communists, which are the Eastern Europe. So there are many factors that are leading the Asian region into a greater integration. So first one would be the trade. So the world economy is intertwined with each other. Whether we like it or not, we all want or need something from another part of the world, including global trade and facilities. So these nations can readily supply each other's needs. The next one would be similar culture. So the cultures of Asia is diverse but they do not share many things. This makes it an easier fit during times of negotiations. And the next one will be the common goals. So the Asian region recognizes the mutual benefit of a slow integration, and that is to accelerate the economic growth, so social progress and cultural development, and to promote peace. So similar security needs. So aside from small localized rebels, this association needs only to contend with foreign supported terrorist groups, which are usually handled well. So challenges to regionalism. So resurgence of militant nationalism and populism. So this involves the conflict between the NATO, the United States, and the Vladimir Putin's anti-NATO movement. So continuing financial crisis. The continuing crisis in the European region continues to lead the United Kingdom into exiting the European Union. Conflict between sovereignty and regional stability. So the Philippines had a difficulty in letting some countries support its condemnation of China's occupation of the West Philippine Sea, because China had given great investments and economic aid to these countries. Differing versions of regionalism. So developed countries like the US may only see regionalism as a tool for political democratization, but developing countries see regionalism as an obstacle to economic globalization because public inquiry slows down its implementation. And lastly, I allow Sir Roldan Ardinas to use this video for academic purposes. Okay, so that would be all. Thank you so much for listening.